in St. Matthew's Gospel, the Gospel according to St. Matthew, in chapter 27. And I'd like to begin reading at about verse 39. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests, mocking him with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and he will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God. And the thieves also which were crucified with him cast the same in his teeth. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there when they heard that said, This man calleth for Elias. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave him to drink. Then the rest said, Let be, let us see whether Elias will come to save him. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. I want you to look at somebody and ask them, what next do I have to go through? Amen. Somebody who's in the middle of a whole lot of stuff, just look at the neighbor and say, what's coming next? Lord have mercy. You cannot go to Calvary at all without giving some thought to the struggle in the garden, and actually to understand the struggle in the garden as a prelude to the cross. I think it's important because there is a connection that is very strong between self-will and God's will. And I suggest to you, and what great singing, Brother Reynolds, and I suggest to you, yes, what great singing. And I suggest to you that there is greater tension between God's will and your will than there is the tension between righteousness and unrighteousness. It seems that when you consider Jesus in the wilderness, you will notice that he exhibited greater power than when he was in the garden. And that's a wonderful thing to argue, and that is that oftentimes you exhibit more power in the wilderness than you do in the garden. But in this case, he exhibited more pain in the garden than he did in the wilderness. I wonder, did I confuse you, or are you still following? It seems to us that our great trial and our great time of difficulty is generally when we have wilderness experiences. But it seems in this case it was in the garden. I would like to associate the garden with peace and the wilderness with struggle. And maybe, just maybe, there is a message in there, and I'm having an epiphany this moment, that maybe we seem to fail more in the garden than we do in the wilderness. Maybe we are more prepared for the struggle of the wilderness than we are for the struggle in the garden. It's one thing to struggle when things all around you are negative. It's another thing to struggle in a pleasant environment. I might have to work on that on another time because I'm feeling that right now. How many times have you failed in the garden and overcome in the wilderness? How many times did you not get through the easier environmental thing and you were able to overcome the hard environmental thing? I play pool every now and then when I get a chance, and sometimes I make a shot that is ridiculously difficult to make and miss the chippy. I don't know, have you ever experienced that? But I have seen the basketball players make ridiculous shots that call for all of their physicality. And then here's a fella laying the ball up all over the basket, all on the back. And oftentimes, the place where you're expected to have victory, you don't. And the place where you're expected to capitulate and fall apart, you stand. And so what Jesus is showing us, that it has anything really to do with where you are. It just happens to do with what your assignment is. Oh, I feel something pushing me here. I hope I didn't peek out in the second service and fall out in the third, but I'll be all right by the help of God. It's important to understand this. It's very important to see that before you operate in your purpose, there are certain things you have to reconcile in your mind. I don't know, have you ever had to do something that was significantly important? It was a decision that was a life-affecting decision. It wasn't something that you could take or leave. It was something that was going to make you or break you. And oftentimes you seek prayer, and my discernment tells me that sometimes people aren't seeking prayer because they want to know what to do. Oftentimes my discernment tells me that people know what to do, but they're just seeking prayer for the courage to do it. You know you should have made that move a long time ago. Ain't no sense in coming to God to ask him, Lord, help me to make a decision. You already know what you should do. What you got to have is the courage to do it. Because some moves in life takes pain to get to the next level. And oftentimes we have a proclivity to put off the pain and procrastinate because we don't want to feel the pain right now. And so what Jesus is showing us is there are times you have to reconcile in your mind the circumstance that you know you have to go through in order to come to a place where you have peace with it. I know I got to do this. Can I make an example? Now you know you got to turn yourself in. You know the police is after you. And now you got to make a decision. How long are you going to procrastinate? Because he's going to catch you on the corner. But you have to reconcile in your mind. There is a victory that is won in the mind. And you have to reconcile it, and you have to war with it until you come to the conclusion that this is the action I will take. When I step out to take it, I'm going to take it with peace because I've already had the fight in my mind. Jesus knew what his assignment was. If John had a revelation of Jesus while he was in his mother's Mary's womb, while he was in his mother's Elizabeth's womb, then Jesus certainly knew what his mission was when he came into the world. There was no question. He was God's gift to the world, and he knew that that's what he had to do. And yet still he brings 3 of his disciples because he is in a horrendous mental state, because his humanity and his divinity is now driving him where he really doesn't want to go. And he goes away and he prays while they sleep. Oh, shame on you sleeping prayer partners. When somebody needs you to call out on the Lord, you sleep. Shame on you who can't feel other people's pain right beside you and know how to call on the Lord to bring them through. Shame on you when you can't feel and become a part of the struggle that even saves your life. Oh, and so he had to go a little further than they. And here's what he said. He said, all things are possible to you. If it be possible, then let this cup pass from me. In other words, God, I know you have omnipresence and you have omniscience, omnipotence, immutability, and eternalness. And there is nobody who can operate within the parameters of your ability to move and change things. And I think you can find somebody else to do this other than me. Have you ever been faced with what God has designated for it to be your role and your purpose, and you abort it because you don't have the courage to take the step? I'm talking to somebody in here who ought to be further down the road now, but because you didn't have the courage to make the turn when you should have, or the courage to put somebody out of your life when you should have, or the courage to walk away from some circumstances when you should have. And now 10 years, 15 years, 5 years later, you're still faced with something you should have changed years ago because God had put his hand on you and this was your assignment. I'm talking to somebody here. You're not going to leave here the same today, because you're going to have to shake yourself and get back in the race and stop being sorry for yourself and stop pitying yourself and understand that God has called you for a purpose. I want to notice now here he is struggling in his humanity, and he goes and he prays 3 times, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this, but because of what is right to do, I will do it because it's my assignment, it's my purpose. And when you are called into purpose, then you have to operate in God's time and according to his schedule. It's going down tomorrow, Jesus, so you might as well get it together tonight and bring yourself to the place where you can understand, I have to do this because nobody in heaven and earth can do what I am assigned to do. I feel it here. There's something in your life that is your assignment. It's idiosyncratically yours. And God is not going to take it and put it in anybody's lap but yours. And the reason is he gifted you for it. And he straightened situations out for you to operate in it. And he's going to chasten you until you get back in line with the purpose he has dictated for your life. You will never feel fulfilled. You will never be fulfilled. You will never feel totally good about yourself until you get in line with what God has gifted you to do. Oh, I feel it here. I feel it. Lord, we need courage. That's what we need here, courage. He had to go alone because when everybody else left him, he had to go alone. And sometimes if you wait for a committee to decide how you ought to operate your life, you will never get anything done. You don't have time to sit around and wait for Aunt Flora to tell Uncle Harry to talk to Cousin Sue to see whether or not you ought to be moving in the direction that God has placed in your spirit. If God put it in your spirit and the thing won't die because it's your assignment, then God has gifted you to operate that assignment. Then get up and quit procrastinating and start moving towards what God has called you to do. Everybody's not going to pat you on the back. Can I just say this for a minute? Some people like to gravitate around people who like to pat them on the back because they are non-achievers themselves, and they would rather be around non-achievers who make them feel significant than be around people who challenge them. I feel like preaching here. I don't want a lot of praise from folk who haven't achieved anything themselves, because that praise for the most part is flattery. It's somebody trying to get something from you because it's just flattery. If you don't know who you are, anybody can make you who they want you to be. I wish I could talk about this. This is not the message. The truth is, you need to be around people who challenge you. Be around people who challenge your mind, challenge your way of thinking, who challenge your philosophies. I don't want to just walk through a whole lot of yes folk who seem to want to just, pat you on the back with a lot of useless praise. Put me in the arena where my back is against the wall, where I've got to come out with my best creative thought, where I got to come out with my most grandiloquent presentation, where I got to come out with the depth of who I am. There is a challenge that'll bring the best you out of you, and you can't back up and allow yourself to be around a lot of mediocrity and get happy with mediocrity when there's excellence that God is calling out of you. Oh, God, help me here. Y'all excuse me. J.A.T. Robinson talked about the tension that Jesus had. He was one of the greatest Catholic scholars that have ever lived. And he says, and I quote, "This insistence on Jesus being a genuine product of the process, with all the prehistory of man in his genes, is, I believe, one of the distinctive presuppositions of the 20th century Christology, and that is, the previous ages had found it difficult to assert that he was genuinely subject to environmental influences when he got here, that he was really shaped by these instead of just passing through them," unquote. Those who want to be religious and not spiritual want to put Jesus in a mystical, ontological, ethereal platform. But the truth is, he felt what you felt, and he felt like I felt. And I'm glad. I'm glad because sometimes I don't want to do some things, and I just don't want to do it. Don't make me feel like I have to want to do it. You don't have to want to do something to do it. I wish you'd understand that, because there are times in your life you just don't want to do it. I have written many checks I didn't want to write. And you too. Sometimes you got to, all right, since you're going to hold out on me and look like Alice in Wonderland, there are some things you do that you resent doing, and you do it just because you should, but you really don't want to. And I could take you through marriage life and give you a list of things, and I might stop at one in particular, and you catch on. Or I might take you to your relatives who keep borrowing your money, and you write them the check, but now you're getting sick of it, and you're resenting the fact that you worked so hard so much of your life and they just fooled around, and now they come with guilt statements like, well, the Lord blessed you with all that, and you ought to bless somebody else with a little bit of something. The Lord blessed me through working for it. I had to be out there sweating when you were sitting around eating peanut butter and smoking whatever you were smoking, and now here it is, I'm working hard and you just wait to take it from me. I might write the check, but I resent it. Jesus had to get to the place where he didn't resent it. but he understood what his purpose was. When you understand that this is your assignment and God has raised you up in your space in order to be in your space what he has called for you to be, then you've got to reconstruct your mind to understand that this is not about me. This is about what God has called me to do. I feel it here. I'm going to take it further. Jesus had to grow like all of us. And that's why Luke said he increased in wisdom, he grew mentally. He increased in stature, he grew physically. He even grew spiritually because in favor with God, and he became socially acceptable in favor with man. So what he's saying is that every one of us who have a relationship with God has to increase in wisdom, and certainly as we increase physically, but we must increase in favor with God, and we must increase in favor with one another. There is a social side, there is a spiritual side, and there's a wisdom side with the physical side. And he was protected as a child. Do you remember when he was with his mothers and fathers and went to the temple, and 3 days they couldn't find him? And this is what we call in theology a messianic awakening. At 13 he came, 12 he came to understand that he had an assignment that nobody else had. I'll touch somebody early. This is an early touch. This one won't count. And tell them when you're going to wake up. When you're going to wake up to who you are. You have been programmed by other people for so long that you need to wake up to who you are. You have been protected so long by people who don't want to release you to your destiny, and you just can't sit down here. This thing is upsetting me. You see, what's going to happen is this: you're going to live 70, 80 years and nobody knew you were in the world. You're going to come in here quietly and leave quietly and nobody